Hey everybody, Mike Iaconelli here. Welcome to a brand new edition of In the Shop. And I've got a very timely one for you today. And we're gonna be talking about the top 3 lures for late fall fishing. Late fall fishing. And you know from some of our other videos that fall fishing is a tricky time. And fall fishing is broken into 3 periods, right? You've got that early fall transition, they're moving shallow, getting ready to feed. You have the fall feed, which is that middle period, and dude, they're eating like gangbusters. You could throw anywhere, you're catching a ton, but then you have your late fall transition, this late fall period. And it gets a little tricky again, because in this late fall period or late fall transition, the fish are moving from where they fed to where they're going to winter. And that's really your mindset on location, is fish that are moving from where they fed in the fall to where they're going to go in the winter. And you know, I'm fishing a lot of transition areas and stopping points, secondary points, main points on the way out of those feeding areas. But there are 3 lures for fishing during this time of the year that really catch the bulk of my fish in the late fall. And I want to talk to you about those baits today. The first one is a crankbait, a diving bait. And you know, this bait is so key in the late fall because you've got to search for these fish, right? In the late fall, they're moving. They're constantly moving. And as they move, they stop. They stop on these little specific spots. But to find those key areas, even with the best electronics in the world, sometimes can be hard. So you want a lure that could help you find those areas and find the fish. And a crankbait is that kind of lure. You know, when you look at it, it's got a bill. It dives to a determined depth based on the size of that bill. And you can constantly reel it and bump the bottom. And that's why a crankbait for me is my #1 choice in the late fall. Color-wise, I'm always trying to pick something that's mimicking the prevalent forage that time of the year. So is it shad? Is it herring? Go with your whites and your pearls. Is it bluegill or perch? Add something with some chartreuse or green in it. Finally, is it crawfish? You know, go with your darker colors and your browns. But I want to match the hatch with my color. And I mentioned it before, but diving depth is real important. And in the late fall, I want to contact the bottom. So pick a bait that runs as deep or deeper than the bottom depth you're fishing. Probably my #1 bait in the late fall is the Rapala DT series. In particular, the DT6, the 10, and the 14 really hit those key depth zones for that late fall transition, especially the 10. I'm fishing secondary points, I'm trying to bump isolated cover, and I'm trying to find where the fish are stopping in the late fall. #2, and you know, this really becomes a key player in the late fall, is a jig. And you know, in the fall feed, they're so focused in on bait fish, right? Eating forage, long shad, minnows, you know, that longer forage. But in the late fall, their feeding habits start to change a little bit. And a jig, a skirted jig, becomes a key lure for me in the late fall because it does a great job of imitating crawfish. And their diet does start to shift in the late fall. You know, there's a lot of great jigs out there, and depending on the cover, I'll pick some different head styles. But my #1 jig in the late fall period is a football style jig. This is a jig by Missile Jigs called a headbanger. If you look at it, it's got very broad beveled shoulders to the head, and that helps keep this lure out of the snags. It's great in wood, it's great in brush, but when you're fishing harder bottom, and in the late fall, that harder bottom stuff is so key. I'm talking about gravel, chunk rock, boulders, riprap, that football jig comes through it so well. I like to pick a jig weight that's heavy enough to maintain bottom contact. So I'll carry from 3/8 of an ounce all the way to an ounce, but for sure the 1/2 ounce and the 3/4 do the most damage for me in this late fall period. It's great for covering that 5 to 20 foot zone, and again, you want to stay on the bottom. The last thing with this jig for me in the late fall is picking a trailer that has a moderate action to it, okay? Listen, in this period, your water temperature's falling, it's cooling. So it's not super hot, but your water temperature is not wintertime cold yet, right? So I want a trailer that has a moderate amount of action. A crawl trailer, in my opinion, is the perfect trailer for a jig in the late fall. And I love the chigger crawl. I use a lot of the 3, but especially the 4-inch chigger crawl. It's got a very neutral flowing motion, and it matches the activity level of the fish and matches the water temperature that time of the year. So number 2 in the late fall for me is a jig, specifically a football jig with a crawl trailer. All right, last but not least, and I'm going to give you a twofer here, is a lure that can cover water, a lure that can trigger a reaction strike, but a lure that imitates a school of bait fish. You know, in the late fall, those fish that are transitioning out, they're also moving as the bait is moving. So as those bass are moving out of the backs of the pockets and the creeks, and they're moving off of those flats, the schools of bait are moving out at the same time. And because of that, number 3 for me is a spinnerbait or an A-rig, and both of those lures imitate a school of bait. Specifically on the spinnerbait, a multi-bladed spinnerbait is real key in the late fall. You know, a traditional spinnerbait has 1 or 2 blades, but there are some spinnerbait designs out there that have more than 2 blades, have 3 or 4 blades on them. I love these multiple blade design spinnerbaits because they really do imitate a school of bait fish. This one is an awesome spinnerbait. It's a tri-arm, tri-blade spinnerbait. 3 arms, 3 blades. This is a spinnerbait by Mullis called the Lover Spinnerbait. And it really does look like a school of little bait fish moving through the water. The great thing about a spinnerbait is it's a little easier to throw. You don't have to worry about, in some states, hook limitations of the Alabama rig. And in certain tournaments in the late fall, they don't allow you to throw an A-rig. So in those scenarios, a multi-bladed spinnerbait, perfect lure for imitating a school bait. But here's your 2-for. If you can, and you're allowed, and it's not something you don't mind doing, you cannot beat the Alabama rig in late fall. When you look at that thing, call it the A-rig, call it the umbrella rig, whatever you want to call it. When you look at it, you know instantly why this is a late fall killer. It looks exactly like a school of bait fish. The one I have in my hand is one of my favorite ones in the late fall, and this is a Shane's rig, Shane's Baits Mini Blades of Glory, Mini Blade of Glory. And if you look at it, it's a 5-wire that have blades on the wires as well. I love to pair it with smaller swim baits. These are Berkeley Power Swimmers, 2.8, 3.1, those smaller baits. And on a little bit lighter jig head, these are a VMC darter heads, 1/8, 16th ounce, 3/16 ounce. It's easy to throw, but when that thing comes through the water with the blades and those swim baits, it looks exactly like a school of bait fish. And the best way I can describe it is it mesmerizes the fish in the late fall. The other thing about an A-rig that's great is as that water cools off in that late fall period and they're moving toward their winter spots, they suspend a lot. There's a lot of suspending bass. And besides a suspending jerkbait or a single swim bait, nothing is better for suspended bass in the late fall than an Alabama rig. Man, the late fall can be tricky, but it can also be one of the best times to catch a lot of fish and some really, really big ones. Try these. Try these three. Crankbait, a jig, multi-bladed spinnerbait, or an A-rig, one and the same. And you're going to catch some really big bass in that late fall period. I hope you enjoyed this edition of In the Shop. If you did, take a second and hit that subscribe button to make sure that you get brand new In the Shops and other content each week. If you're already a subscriber, do me a favor. Tell your fishing friend about Mike Iaconelli Fishing on YouTube. We're going to get them some great educational content every week. Good luck, good fishing. Try those three in the late fall. You're going to catch them. Bye.